Hey, what is up guys? Calum or Calum's Fish Tanks, and in today's video we're talking about how to grow Bucephalandra in 2021. Why 2021? Because I've made this video in the past and I've learned a lot since then, and I know how to keep this plant a lot better, and I've got a lot more updated information to share with you guys on how to be successful with Bucephalandra. Now before we get started, I'd like to make a quick announcement about my new website, calumsfishtanks.ca. This is where I will be selling all my trimmings from now on, from all my tanks, all submerged grown plants. So if you want to check it out and you're in Canada and you want to help support my channel, I'll have a link to that down below in the description. I've got a ton of submerged grown buce, so if you want to try some Bucephalandra after this video, you can go check those out on there. Bucephalandra is actually a surprisingly easy to grow plant. It has a lot of similarities to super easy ones like Anubias, but a lot of people still fail with this stuff, and I'm going to be teaching you why you may have failed with this in the past and how to avoid those mistakes in the future and how to be successful with this plant. The first question with Bucephalandra is always, does it need CO2? And it definitely doesn't. Bucephalandra can grow without CO2 for sure. It does so very slowly and doesn't get as colorful, but it can definitely grow without CO2, and you can still grow beautiful buce without it. I'm growing some in the tank behind me. It's still pretty small because it had completely melted away when I added it to this tank, but I'll explain why it did that a bit later so you can avoid that problem. The big problem a lot of people have with Bucephalandra is the melting, and there's two main reasons why your Bucephalandra may be melting. The first one being it's bought immersed grown. This basically means the plant was grown outside of water, and when you move it to your tank, the big change is the amount of CO2, especially if it's a low-tech tank. When it's grown out of water, it has a bunch of access to CO2, and if you move it to a low-tech tank, there's barely going to be any CO2. And that will cause a big change for the plant, and that's what leads to the melting and can end up killing your plant. To avoid this, I'd recommend looking for hobbyists selling this if you're planning to use it in a low-tech tank. With a high-tech tank, the risk is a lot less. So if you're looking for Bucephalandra for a low-tech tank, try to find submerged or hobbyist grown Bucephalandra. Now the second reason your Bucephalandra may melt is because the tank isn't well cycled. Bucephalandra does really badly with ammonia and nitrates in the water. This can cause the plant to completely melt away. So I'd recommend, if you're setting up a new tank, waiting to add the Bucephalandra till the tank is, well cycled and it's established enough to have stable parameters for this plant to be successful in. Even high amounts of nitrates can cause melting in Bucephalandra, but for the low-tech tank behind me, it was probably ammonia. I had some beautiful big Bucephalandra that was grown in the exact same tank, all low-tech, but then when I redid the tank, tore it all down and re-added the buce, it completely melted away because of the ammonia being released by the substrate, which was super unlucky, but it's slowly coming back. Now apart from melting, the other big problem a lot of people have with Bucephalandra is algae. This plant is really slow growing, so you have to have a pretty clean tank to keep it algae free. The one a lot of people struggle with the most is blackbeard algae, and this is usually caused by a buildup of organic materials. This is basically fish and shrimp waste in your soil around it that kind of leak nutrients onto the plant, and then you'll get blackbeard algae or other algae as well. So you got to keep your tank semi-algae free to keep this stuff growing well. So we've already talked about how this plant doesn't need CO2, but now let's talk about the lighting for it as well as fertilization. Like I mentioned just a second ago, this plant is a really slow grower, so it doesn't need a lot of fertilization. Less fertilization is actually more with this stuff, and if it is a low-tech tank and you don't need to fertilize for the other plants, I wouldn't even recommend adding it. Fertilization can cause more problems than it's worth, especially if this tank is mainly epiphyte plants like Bucephalandra, Anubias, and Java fern. Now the main difference between this plant and Anubias is the amount of light you're going to need to give it. This plant likes a little bit more light than Anubias, and that's how you get the best colors out of this stuff. It's all about how much light you put on it. In cases where you have a taller tank, like a 55 gallon that's like 20 some inches tall, or a tank that's like 18 inches tall, what I do is get some sort of hardscape material and put the plant a lot closer to the source of light. Light, has a hard time getting down to the bottom, so if you place it down near the bottom, this plant won't do as well in those types of situations. Where you want to place this stuff is going to be different in every tank. You want to place it where it's going to get an adequate amount of light, But in tanks with a ton of light, like my tanks with the Chihiro's Vivid 2, I've got them in more shaded areas so I don't get too much algae. You're gonna have to kind of mess around with things to find what placement is best for your Bucephalandra. Now let's talk a little bit about propagation. Propagation itself is super easy. Waiting to propagate this stuff is hard because it is so slow growing. What you're going to want to do is get a sharp pair of scissors and just trim it along the rhizome. You want to leave at least 3 or 4 inches on each half of the rhizome you cut and have a couple roots on each so it can survive. The plants will need roots to survive. If they don't have roots, it's not ready to trim yet. To get more dense growth, what you can do is take the leaves at the back of the rhizome, not where the new growth is, where the old growth is, and you can trim those off. This will encourage the plant to send out side shoots and you can get much bushier growth and have this stuff propagate a little bit quicker. But yeah guys, that pretty much does it for how to grow Buce in 2021. If you're looking for Bucephalandra in Canada, make sure to check out my website, kalemsfishtanks.ca. But anyways guys, thank you guys so much for watching. This was Kalem's Fish Tanks.